everyone. Happy Friday, April the 12th, 2024. I had to think about that for a second. It's very, very good to have you all with us today. I hope your week has gone well. As always, let us know in the comments where you're at and what you're working on and what genealogical discoveries you've made this week. Tell us about the exciting finds that you've uncovered. I actually had a fantastic research week. I can't tell you about it yet, but it will come soon enough, and I'm really excited to see the finished product. So hello to all of you and thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jen Baldwin. I'm the research specialist for Findmypast, and today we have a very, very cool session set up for you. So hello, Roz. I'm sorry it's raining in Massachusetts again. It's nice and sunny in Colorado today, although I haven't checked the temperature yet. Georgia's in Essex. Weather is very nice. It's good to hear. Sarah's up in Wexford. Fernie in Minnesota. Welcome, Fernie. I don't remember your name popping up before, but happy to have you with us. Daphne's in Somerset, trying to find, I hope you get your sound fixed, Daphne. Janet in North Wales, no major discoveries, but working on a link to the surname Gazin. That's an interesting one. I don't think I've heard that before. If anybody has a Gazin in your tree, connect with Janet. That would be good. Jenny's in Devon. Fernie says she's been a lurker. Right. Well, thank you for coming on this with us, Fernie. That's great. Rosie's in Shropshire, of course. Karen's with us in Enfield. Spent a day at the British Library on some railway research. That sounds really interesting. Karen, that sounds good. I like trains. We do have Daisy in the comments with us today. Thank you, Daisy, very much. From a surprisingly sunny South London. That's good. Let's see. Kim is with us. Andrew's in Lancashire. Heather's in Edinburgh. Ellen, gorgeous sunny morning. 54 already in Roscoe. Wow. Yeah. Okay. 12C for those of you who don't know. 54 sounds nice at, 10 o'clock in the morning there? I think Roscoe's in Central. Sue's in Guildford, of course. Shirley in Cambridgeshire. Daphne. We already talked about Daphne. Let's see. We've got Anne up in Ontario. Cloudy and rainy. Not a big surprise. All right, so some good stuff today. I want to actually get straight into today's session because we have a guest with us today, which is exciting. But I'm going to pop the question of the week up on the screen so you guys have that and you can start chatting about it. It was not in the Facebook post. Sorry about that this week, but this week's question: have you recorded your family blitz story? Have you taken the time to sit down with the members of your family and talk about what that experience was like across the country, no matter where your ancestors were? What was it like to be involved in that, to witness that, to have long-term generational memories of that? How did that period of time, specifically the Blitz in World War II, how did that affect your family? So that's our question this week. It's a little bit of an emotive one potentially, but I'm sure there's going to be some incredible stories shared as well today. Right. So with that, we are going to get into our guest today and we're going to do new records and stuff, but I'm going to kind of pepper them in and then I'll summarize at the end. But we do have a guest, so we want to bring him on. So I'm going to introduce now Damien Kimberley and add him to the screen. Hello, Damien. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Damien is with the Coventry Archives, who we have entered into an exclusive partnership with, and we are launching records from. And for those of you who watched last week, you'll know already, I talked about some of those records last week as well. And we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into that partnership today. Damien, can you just start by telling us a little bit about what you do there and what's your title and how do you help people?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm the local studies officer here at Coventry Archives, and I've been up here about 12 years now. I started back in 2005 at the Transport Museum, not too far away from here. So I think in June I've done about 19 years so far, and over a few different roles. But at the moment I'm local studies officer. So that involves basically taking care of the historic Coventry Library, the photographs, the maps, the pamphlet collection, the newspapers, that kind of thing. But I also do man a lot of the desks here. We've got two rooms here, the reading room and the research room. So on occasion, I'll be manning the reading room. facilitating those people, and or the research room that you have to book an appointment for. So that's about producing records and bringing them upstairs and just making sure that everything's looked for. But we get a whole mix of people coming in here, academics, students, people that just want to do their family history and that kind of thing. So yeah, really, really interesting place to work.
Yeah, fantastic. I love an archive. Who doesn't love an archive, really? Can you tell us just a little bit about the collection and what you have to offer there, so our members kind of know what's available at the Coventry Archives?
Well, it's difficult to know where to start, really. I mean, Coventry's, for those who don't know and maybe live overseas, Coventry's a really old place. It's, getting on for nearly 1,000 years old. So we're really fortunate to have some records that go back as almost as far as the very beginnings. We've certainly got records that go sort of from the 13th, 14th century, a little bit before. So that's called the Borough Archive. So that's the really old stuff. And once upon a time, that would have been kept in a really old building as well, which still exists in Coventry within St. Mary's Hall, which is kind of part of one of the finest medieval guild halls you'll ever see. So in 2007, this place was created as the History Centre, Coventry, and it brought together two collections, which was the Coventry Records Office, which existed on this site, but also the local studies library collection that was in Central Library. So they came together and it became the History Centre. So yeah, we've got some amazing records, just off the top of my head, stuff like the Leet book, which I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but basically it's a kind of a census of the time. I've got a copy of it here. It's a mayor's register and it goes from 1420 to 1555. As I say, this is one of a few transcripts that were made by a lady called Mary Dormer Harris, and she took 10 years looking through all these old records and putting that book together in a kind of readable and accessible way. So we've got the original downstairs. It's a big, beautiful, incredible book. Yeah, so we've got stuff like that to other things like the Bartleek bicycle collection, which is the physical bicycle collection is down at the Transport Museum. So the very earliest bicycles, but we've got his bound volumes, his magazines, photographs and letters, and it's probably the most comprehensive historical cycling collection in the world. I'd challenge anyone to find a better one or a more comprehensive one. So yeah, we've got loads and loads of stuff here of interest for a whole loads of different people.
Yeah, I am interested in everything, which is part of my problem, like going down the rabbit hole. But I know you have a pretty extensive map collection as well, and I have never met a genealogist who doesn't like a map. All maps, actually. Can you tell us just a tease about your map collection?
Well, yeah, yeah, once you get me started on a map too, I get easily sidetracked if I'm looking for something.
Yep.
So we've got the usual Ordnance Survey maps down the far end. Those sort of 5 first editions from 1887 through to about 1937. They're fantastic, especially for us in Coventry, in terms of just showing that sort of 60-year period and the change. Because Coventry had boundary extensions, so you can see all these fields being swallowed up by new estates in the 1920s, 30s, and things like that. But some of those we've got larger scales of the same maps as well, and they're incredible because they detail actual names of buildings, and you wouldn't believe the amount of pubs that existed in central Coventry in the sort of turn of the century. There was maybe 10 on one street and some next door to each other all over the place. Fantastic.
I know online there's a map of pubs that are plotted. I'm trying to remember the year, but it's for London. And it's just a map. It's just a sea of red. So you guys get on that, make a pub map. It'd be good.
Well, actually, someone did.
Oh, really?
It's kind of a crude one. But yes, somebody did create a map, and we have got it somewhere. But other than that, we've got very early tithe maps that are about boundaries and who owns what, and you very often find that some of these fields will have names, and then these names kind of they become known as certain things, and we have the Board of Health maps as well, which are really, really fascinating. The level of detail in some of these maps and the color is just incredible. So yeah, and then we've just got various bits and bobs maps from all over the years, from railway maps to sewage maps, the river, charting the river, and if there's building plans, sometimes they'll detail a bit of the city where they're building. So yeah, I told you not to get me started.
Yeah, well, and I think Karen said it really well. Actually, I thought it was not allowed to be a family historian and not like maps. So she's right. I think you're absolutely correct, Karen. So we could probably just change the topic for today and talk about maps, and everybody would be totally happy. But this partnership, I think, and Andrew actually made this comment, I think the relationship between the Coventry Archives and Findmypast is really a good way to showcase exactly why these discussions and these relationships are important. So Andrew said he came across a YouTube video that was moaning about the quality of digitization, but he pointed out that the example was that was referred to as badly scanned had been burned. And so you can't complain about digitization if the original is actually in bad shape, right? And so Andrew gives us the chance to kind of segue into why these relationships are important, right? And the conservation behind some of the effort. So can you tell us a little bit about conservation of the records that we've worked on, and what you guys do at the archive that, like you have these really old records and these incredible collections. What does that look like from your standpoint in terms of conservation?
It's, I suppose these days conservation is a little bit more of a luxury. It's not the kind of the first thing that we have the resources and the capacity to sort of deal with. But we did make sure with the records that we were sending out to yourselves that they were all in a shape that we could allow them to go out, and we make sure they were packaged up all right and secure and things like that. But yeah, we do have a conservator on site, but she's not full time. So, and then her kind of energy is kind of pulled in all different directions. So, once we do find something, particularly in this collection that's damaged, we have been trained in some respects to have a little go ourselves, particularly with sort of some paper repair work and things like that. But yeah, back to the original question, that I'm aware of those records. When the original record's burnt, there's nothing you can do about unless you Photoshop it out.
Right, but you can't do that either, because that's not actually being true to the original document, right? And I think a lot of people don't realize actually how much goes into these kinds of partnerships before the records ever get online, right? So this partnership in particular has been in the works for 2 years already at this point, and we're now launching records. So it's 2 years worth of work just to get us to the point where we can talk about it.
Well, I actually, it was about 10 years ago that I initially made an approach to Findmypast, and we did have a couple of people come up here and look at some of the records we have. I believe it was Paul Nixon at the time.
Probably.
So nothing came to fruition, unfortunately, at that time. But yes, I was involved in it again the second time round, and it's about looking and seeing what records we do have and how they can be transferred and be made available to other people, and what's going to be popular, what's name rich, what's unique, what's going to give them a different angle or something else to look at that they probably haven't seen or considered before. So it's a fabulous partnership, and I'm really, really pleased that these records are finally out, because you're right, it's a long time down the line.
Let's talk about the records then. We've been launching records for a couple of weeks now. And I know we have done quite a lot. So over 284,000 records published amongst the with the partnership over the last couple of weeks, and a huge range of records. So pick one that you want to talk about. But we've got cemetery records, directories, registers, schedules from 1747 all the way through 1966. There's some really colorful collections, really adding a lot of context, way more than just names and dates and locations. So what's your favorite, maybe, Damien, that you want to kind of cherry pick from that list?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the cancelled vehicle registration cards are probably the first of their kind of that nature to go out. And if you did have any ancestors in Coventry, these cards run from 1921 through to 1964, but we've allowed them to go out up until 1939, I think, down to, for various reasons. So yeah, you can find out where your ancestor was living, obviously their name, their address, and what vehicle they were driving at the time. So it'll often give the first and last registered keeper of a vehicle. So there, and my hat goes off to the person that had to physically digitize every single one of those cards, front and back, because I think it's 120,000 cards or something like that. So that's one. I particularly like also the Works issued magazine. So Coventry, very famous for making bicycles and motors back in the day. So we've got these amazing magazines that were issued. We've got them in bound format, and they're great also for just naming so many people that used to work in the firms, but also in many occasions with a photograph. Some of them cover the First World War, for example, and have got pictures of every soldier. Really good quality images as well. So yeah, and you get long service awards, you get weddings. If you're a part of a club, an angling club or a cricket club or a dominoes club, you'll be named, so they're fascinating too. So of all the records, they stick out for me because I find them so engaging in terms of when I've discovered things in those records too, and the Coventry graphic as well, which runs from 1911 through to 21, covers the First World War amazingly as well. But also you've got adverts, you've got news, events, and it is, as the title says, it's very graphic, so it's full of imagery.
It's brilliant. Those are the best kinds, for sure.
Yeah.
I am gonna, if I can get this to work for myself again here, I am gonna put on the screen a full list of the collections from this particular partnership, and I'm almost there, you guys. Thanks for your patience. Here we go. So you can see everything that we've done. We're going to talk about a couple of these in a little bit, and some of them we covered last week as well. So if you missed last week's session, please do rewatch that. Of course, you can watch it on Facebook or YouTube. But included in this set are burials, workhouse admissions, company directories, all those publications that Damien was just talking us through with all that wonderful content and those photographs. The vehicle registrations, again, we looked at last week, and I learned all about the standard. That's not a car company that came over to the US, so I had actually never heard of it before. And then there's some newspaper content as well in this, and we'll like I said, we'll get into a little bit more of that as we progress. But I just wanted to share that. And then we had a question very specifically for you that had popped up, and I'm going to take a chance to address that as well. Jean wants to know if the bishop's transcripts that you have in your collection were also destroyed by fire. Do you have any bishop's transcripts that were damaged?
That is a really good question, and you caught me a little bit on the hop. We do have out there in the reading room on the right-hand side a lot of work that's been done previously by the Coventry Family History Society, where they've transcribed a lot of the birth, deaths, and marriages. But I believe, many of those, if not all of those bishop transcripts, don't exist anymore because they were destroyed. But I can get back to you with an accurate response to that, if you don't mind, Jean.
Yeah, fantastic. So Jean, or actually, Damien, is there an email address or a good way to contact the archive so that people can make those kind of queries?
Absolutely. So, Daisy, if you contact us on the email address is archives, all lowercase, at cvlife, as in Charlie Victor life.co.uk, and we'll pick that up and get back to you.
All right, I'm going to put that on the screen.
Sometimes when you get asked a question, it just is not
absolutely.
quite there.
So say it one more time, and I'll put it on the screen. Archives
at cvlife.co.uk, all lowercase.
I almost got it right, but not quite. All right, so we'll put that up on the screen. Perfect, good. And we'll leave that there for a little while. If you have questions for the archives or doing research in Coventry, it's always a good idea to reach out to the archive and actually ask them for their help and their expertise. And that actually is a great learning moment. So Damien, when someone sends you an email, what do you want to see in that as someone who takes those kinds of queries on a pretty routine basis?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, basically as much information as you can possibly provide. We get some emails that are really quite vague, and then that just creates more work because you've got to respond to them and say, can you give us more detail? So, yeah, just be very clear and concise about what you're looking for. That's the best way to make an approach, and then what we then do is look at that, and then we normally share the emails around to the team, we'll get back to you as soon as is possible.
A few years ago, I heard a suggestion from another researcher. Said, send a detailed email in the body of the email, and then send your research plan as an attachment so that they have that full view of, this is what I've already done, and these are these very specific questions I'm asking. I've done that a couple of times. It's been pretty successful, but I've also had a couple of people go, I don't know why you sent this. This is way too much information.
Yeah,
here's, too much. So it's a little bit of a balance, I suppose, but always good to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
And I think, there's a growing dependency on online records. And while online records are fantastic and wonderful, there is still so much sitting in archives like yours across the world, really, that may not ever go online, or certainly not in our lifetimes. And that is a discussion that's worth having with your local archivist.
Yeah, absolutely. We do get a lot of requests where people say, can you, they found the reference that they want on the Coventry Collections website, and they say, is it possible that you can do you have these digital copies of these already? And in most cases we don't. Excuse me. We have done certain digitization projects over the years, and very often they just end up in our external hard drive somewhere, and sometimes you forget you've even done it in the first place. But yeah, we do, we've got building plans here going back to the sort of late 1800s. We get a lot of inquiries for those, and these can sometimes be AO in size once you folded them all out. And structural engineers, they want copies of these things. So that's another difficulty, is how do you make a copy of something? So do you buy a AO plotter, or send it out to someone else that can do it, or do you just get them to photograph it? So yeah, it is a problem. I wish we could digitize more, but we when you go back to the maps, we did do a project 2 or 3 years ago where we've got most, if not all, of our maps now in high res digital quality. So that was a fantastic one.
Yeah, that's good. Maps.
Yeah.
More maps. Yeah. So obviously, today is actually our final part of this release and this partnership. And today we're going to relaunched Blitz Records. For those of you who haven't seen the blog post or gotten your email yet, make sure that you take a look at the records that are described on the blog. Daisy always does a fantastic job writing that content. Can you give us any insights into these records, or how the city and its inhabitants kind of experience the Blitz? Just high level touch on, what are these records going to tell us?
Well, I mean, yeah, Coventry suffered really badly in the Second World War. There were two major attacks. So the first one was November the 14th, 1940, and then April the following year as well. So yeah, two very major attacks, obviously going after a lot of the factories that we've got here in Coventry, mostly motor factories that adapted and changed over their production to help the war effort. A lot of these factories were concentrated very close to the city centre as well, so hence why so much damage was actually done. So yeah, you've got, you know, even the cathedral, for example, got hit. But yeah, for the so we've got the war bomb damage schedules, and that details every single property in Coventry that either were destroyed or even took minor damage. So, and again, these will tell you a name and an address and a little bit more information. So yeah, they're really well requested sort of records that we have. So again, it's another good reason to get something digitized, because when you're getting something so heavily used, quite often there's a lot of wear and tear on that particular item. So, you know, this helps us as well. So yeah, and we've got so many more records to do with the war. There's so many books been written about the Blitz in Coventry. I've had so many people bringing in their own personal accounts and stories of their remembrance of living through that experience as well. So yeah, it's fascinating.
So for those who have possibly a connection to the Coventry Blitz, do you preserve those stories in some capacity? Do you have a collection of memoirs, for example, or diaries or journals, or what do you do with the content that's brought in from those family narratives?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything that we should maybe compile these, but yeah, they tend to come in kind of piecemeal. Quite randomly, so we just kind of gather them together, and they are kept in a in a similar place. We'll accession something, make it available for someone to find and look for. So yeah, sorry,
Yeah, that's all right. I definitely understand it. And actually, on that note, Sarah left a comment that her partner's granddad remembered seeing the light flickering in the sky from Leicester on his 23rd birthday. It was Coventry ablaze from the bombing. So I would imagine that there's quite a lot of that kind of sentiment coming in, and hearing those stories on a pretty routine, I don't know if routine is the right word, but on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah, there was, I've heard lots of people to tell a story about seeing the glow of Coventry from afar. But then you had lots of children, of course, who were evacuated to, in some cases, not far outside of Coventry, but in other cases, they were much further afield to places like Wales and such. But I know that some just went up the road to Solihull, for example. And then the kids were getting involved in stuff like doing iron runs, you know, collecting metal and helping out and things like that as well. So
yeah.
And obviously, we've got a really good photographic record of that time. So yeah, it was a horrible time, but it also, in many ways, shaped Coventry's future because of how it turned out today, if you know what I mean. It opened up the opportunities to modernize. Coventry at that point was still very much had a medieval street plan, but it had a population of around 250,000. So it wasn't. If it still existed today, I'm convinced it would be a World Heritage Site.
Right. Yeah.
But maybe the inhabitants would have saw it as a bit backward. So yeah, brand new tower block with hot running water and central heating sounded a brilliant alternative to these little two up, two down houses with the toilet down the bottom of the garden. So, I've actually been spending a lot of time on Bristol in the last couple of weeks, and in that same time frame. So a lot of the very similar story in terms of how they rebuilt and what it looks like now compared to before the Blitz. Daphne asked if there's a collection of photographs in the archive, and before you answer that, I'll note, Daphne, that the Findmypast photo collection actually has a pretty extensive set of photographs from the damage from the Coventry Blitz, and then there's also online the aerial photos from the World War II period. So that's something you can definitely access, and those are free actually, so you can do a quick Google for aerial photos. But then, Damien, what else do you have? Okay, so we used to have this. We still got the really old computer out here, but it finally died. But it had, not that we've lost these images, but it had about 8,000 photographs on there called the Pictures of Coventry collection. We still have those. We've still got all the originals. If you go on a website called Coventry Digital, if you do a search for that in Google, you have to register, but it's free to register, and it's got most of those, a lot of those images from the Coventry collection are on Coventry Digital now, and that's a project that's run by Coventry University. It's not just our collections; it's other people's collections, but it should list who the copyright holder is of a particular image. That's a fabulous resource. Also, Coventry Atlas, which also does something similar, but also allows you to change maps and pin places. But yeah, Coventry Digital is the place to check out first and foremost.
Thank you, Daisy, for getting all these ready for us. Appreciate that. Coventry Digital and Coventry Atlas were the two mentioned there. They're in the chat if you want those URLs. Perfect. So before I ask my last question of you, if anybody listening has specific questions for Damien or for the Coventry Archive just in general, please do put them in the chat, and we'll try and grab them before our time is up today, or of course email them, and of course that email address is on the screen. So please do engage with Damien while we have him and his expertise. And Andrew mentioned earlier, Andrew's one of our regular attendees, and he was very informative last week with me, actually, and has already commented that he absolutely loves, excuse me, the vehicle registrations. And I know Andrew's a big car guy, so appreciate that, Andrew. And
makes it all worthwhile.
Right, yeah, absolutely. If we can make one person happy, we've done our jobs. So our last question today, before we really dive into kind of a detailed look at some of these Blitz records, have you done any of your own family history, Damien? And have you seen anything interesting or surprising? What little tidbits do you have in your tree?
Okay, so yes, I have. Surprise, surprise, being in the place that I kind of work. But no, I became interested in my family history when I was about 10 or 11, because we moved from Grantham in Lincolnshire. I was born in Grantham in Lincolnshire. We moved to Coventry when I was about 3. But when I was growing up, my dad told me that his dad was born in Bedworth, which is just outside Coventry, and it didn't make any sense because my dad was born in Northern Ireland. So then you start unraveling things. So it turns out that my great-grandfather was born in Coventry, and I can trace my direct ancestors in Coventry to the late 1700s at least. But yeah, I found a fascinating story about my 3 times great-grandfather, Thomas Kimberley, who in 1858 was arrested on suspicion of the murder of a gamekeeper at Ryton, which is about 4 miles outside of Coventry. Him and a friend called William Ringrose had gone out poaching, and they were picked up the next day because someone was shot. They didn't do it, which is good, but they were in the jail here for a week until they did find out who did do it, but they just were in the vicinity of that time. But it's amazing to think that you could be picked up from your house the next day just because people are saying things, Yeah. So that was that was great because it was such a detailed report, and it opened him up to me because he said a few things. It described what he was wearing, the fact that he had little terrier dogs and nets and a velveteen jacket and gunpowder in the pockets, and and he was a silk weaver. So silk weaver by day, poaching rabbits by night. 4-mile walk across, and back, 10-mile round trip. Incredible.
Yeah. Those little details are, I think, what draws most of us in, right? And actually, we started at about the same time. I also kind of got hooked around 10 years old. So, I think that's pretty common, right? There's a lot of us, I think, that kind of get the bug early, and if we're lucky enough, develop it into a career.
But yeah, just there's always that annoying bit that you didn't speak to your grandparents enough because you were too young and you
didn't really appreciate. Yeah, absolutely. So we did have a question from Daphne come in, and she wants to know if you can just turn up, or do you need a ticket or an appointment or a reservation?
That's a good question. At the moment, because we have a few staffing issues in as much as we are quite low in staff at the moment, we are doing an all-round appointment only basis. Ordinarily, the reading room you'd just be able to walk into. Research room's always appointment only, but at the moment it's appointment only. But we've always got space.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Fab. So, Damien, thank you so much for joining us today. You are welcome to stay on and watch, but I also know you're busy, and you had your last call for visitors of the archive and the museum right before we started, so I'm sure you have stuff to do. So if you need to call it, that's okay, but we're going to go into a discussion on the records and start talking through the question of the week. So thank you very much, Damien.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your time very much. And then I'm going to try and figure out how to get the banner off my screen. There we go. Fascinating conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed that. I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to look at some of the examples of the records that we were talking about. It's just a little easier when we can do this so you guys can see the whole, right? The whole big screen. So let me get that going. And right, cool. So we already shared this, but just to kind of recap and make sure everybody got a chance to see it, feel free to take a screenshot of this or whatever works for you, or pause the video and watch it back later, and make sure to kind of look at these online on, of course, on Findmypast. We're incredibly excited about this partnership, as we talked about with Damien. It's been a long time in the making, so it's just fantastic to see these records kind of become available. Today we're really going to talk about the new releases for this week. So that includes the Coventry bomb damage schedules from 1940 to 41. So this is the two major events of the Blitz that hit Coventry that Damien was talking about just a few minutes ago. The first from the night of the 14th into the 15th of November, and then the second happened kind of the 8th and 9th of April, 1941. And you can see some of the statistics on the screen, but that first event, right, was obviously probably the bigger of the two, is from my understanding. But 43,000 houses are destroyed or damaged that night, with 500 tons of explosives. I don't know. It's clearly hard for anybody who wasn't alive during that period to actually kind of imagine what that might have looked like. But the reports that are included in this collection are really quite detailed. So you end up getting kind of a register of such that looks like this. So this is actually the register for Hertford Square in Coventry. And you can see, all of the dwelling houses, the addresses, the occupiers' name. And actually you see, if you look closely at this list, you see a couple of surnames that come up more than once, right? So the player surname, for example, at the top is listed twice. So you kind of think, possibly they're related, or act, functioning, living as neighbors. The owner's name of the property, the value of the property, and conditions, and like notes about the extent of the damage, right? The roof, the walls, the floors, the contents of the home, and then just general comments. So these are pretty detailed reports. Just to give you a sense of the destruction, of course, this is that same location. This is Hertford Square, from the Findmypast photo collection. And this is an image that was taken just in the days after that attack. And I know we've all seen pictures of the Blitz before, and we've seen this, but there's a difference when you put it into kind of real context and you think about it. And, that family was living at that address. And it's much more impactful, I think, when you can put a name and a face, if you will, to the people who were impacted by the Blitz. The second set of records is covering the German air raids from Coventry. This includes mortuary lists, and they have names, addresses, occupations, age, sex, marital status, the cause of death, all sorts of information about the particular individual in question, right? The victims, the citizen victims, most of them were citizens, of course, not active duty members of the military. And as Damien said, right, the Coventry was a target area primarily because of their manufacturing. So a lot of employees impacted. And then, of course, we know the destruction of the personal homes. So we wanted to give you an example of what these kind of look like, but also just again, put it into context, right? So we did a little bit of digging, did a little research, and we found the Bass family. So this is the Bass family in 1939 register. They lived at 14 Mount Street in Coventry, and you see a number of them, right? Thomas, Annie, Walter, Jack, Joan, James, George, and Clement, all at the same address, a variety of ages. And, you've got some children who are at school, and then, of course, the parents. And then when you turn to these records from Coventry, from the archives just a year later, we find Annie and Clement and Doris have all become victims of the Blitz, as well as George and Jean and Leonard and Thomas. It's pretty striking. I'll admit, when I was pulling these slides even together, just doing the visual aid for all of you, this is hard to do sometimes. There are moments, I have no connection whatsoever to this family, but man, that's pretty incredible thing to lose all of those people at one time. And it was the same person, the same survivor, that had to go in and identify all of the deceased. Pretty heavy stuff. If you look at it from the perspective of the individual person, right? Instead of that kind of 30,000 foot view where you say, well, oh, X number of people were impacted by the Blitz, but this is real. And this is one of the reasons why these relationships with archives like Coventry are so important to us, because it really does give us a chance to tell the stories of the individual people and really remember them in an appropriate way. Now, the Coventry Archive relationship also includes newspaper content, and we have published additional newspapers to kind of complement the Coventry set as well. So this week's new newspapers include the Bedworth Times, the Coventry Graphic. We have a couple other titles there, the Matlock Mercury. You can see the year ranges being spread across. So these are all new this week. My personal favorite is Percy's Coventry Gazette from 1778. It was a very pro-American, pro-colonist publication. It didn't run for very long, but I have heard of it before in some of my readings and my studies of the American Revolution. You guys know, if you've watched for any length of time, that's an area of history I particularly enjoy working on. So when I learned that Percy's was on the list of new papers, I was really excited. It's a delightful piece to go and read through, because it is so heavily pro-American, right? Pro-rebellion, if you will. And again, it didn't last very long, but it's a fun publication to read for anybody who's got any interest in that part of history. And then we've also done a number of updates this week. So a lot of titles updated. And again, you can see this on the blog for Findmypast, as well as the British Newspaper Archive. And there's a huge range here, but just a couple of things to point out, right? The Eastbourne Gazette from 1988, quite recent. You've got a number of years from Northamptonshire Evening Telegraph, again, kind of moving into that current time frame. But then the Toronto Daily Mail, right, from Canada as well. So another year added to that publication. So a lot of updates this week as well, as per usual. Huge shout out to our newspaper team. They're the same people that Damien was talking about in terms of scanning all those individual cards. Our team and at our scanning facility is just really incredible, and we're grateful to them for what they do every week. So fantastic. Right, so let's then go into question of the week, because there have been a lot of responses, really good stuff, and we want to thank you for sharing your stories. Fernie just left a comment, what sobering information, and yes, in context makes it more real, and that's when I was talking about the Bass family. Yeah, exactly, well said, Fernie, that it is very sobering, but at the same time, it's information that deserves to be preserved and made available. So we're really excited, again, to be working with Coventry on all of that. So let's see what you guys were saying while Damien and I were talking. Shirley got us going. I was affected by the Blitz. We were bombed. She was 4 when that happened. I wonder, Shirley, if you have any actual living memories, or is it just kind of stuff that's been fed to you, right? Like when you're a little kid and you think you remember something, but you're not really sure if it's real. I hope that you've documented what you do remember and your experiences. Karen saying, no family left that were alive during the Blitz, but late mother was just a baby at the time, and she did tell me about sheltering under stairs and wearing a horrid gas mask. And I think, Karen, that's actually, and I know a number of you said something about, there's no one left to ask. But if you have stories like this that you were told at some point, it's worth it even now for you to sit down and write those things out and document that story. And Karen, and you probably already have, but for those of you watching who maybe haven't thought about, this is the story that was relayed to me by my grandmother or my parents, and it was relayed to them by their parents, even that oral history is worth preserving and documenting as part of your family research. Kim, sharing with us, her great-grandmother was living in Bethnal Green during the Blitz. Her house never suffered a direct hit, but houses were damaged around her, and she narrowly missed the tube disaster as she was still making her way there. Oh, wow. Yeah. Some of that, again, for someone who, I'm thousands of miles away and I'm a generation apart, at least one generation off, and it's hard to picture. It's hard to put yourself into that context, but reading kind of through some of these stories and understand and reading through memoirs and other kind of personal narratives, it does start to give you a mental image. It was just such an incredible thing to have to live through. Janet, my late mom, wrote about her wartime experiences. Fantastic. I hope you have a copy of that. I'm assuming you do. Was working at a factory when a V-1 rocket hit. Notes that when the bomb explosion in their back garden in 1940, they were out. Wow. So actually hit their back garden. That's yeah, it is incredible stuff. Sarah, I have my father's schoolboy diary from Wexford Town, and in it he mentions the different planes flying over Southeast Ireland. He also spoke about the family visiting a German plane crash site in the south of the county. Wow. That's crazy. It's just so hard to imagine. I hope that I have a couple diaries in my family collection. They're not from this period, but it's just kind of always been in the back of my head that I really need to sit down, not just digitize the images, but actually transcribe them and make a full copy. And I've started that process, but I need to get back to it. So I hope, Sarah, that you're kind of thinking along the same lines. Andrew says the Blitz didn't hit our area, but he's written up his mom's recollections. She was 11. Her widowed mother was on nights making munitions. Okay. Mom and her sister would meet her in town for breakfast. The girls would then head to school. My grandma would go to bed. Yeah, would not be allowed these days. You're right. Leaving the girls at home alone. Yeah, I'm very glad, Andrew, that you've written that up. I'm not surprised, knowing you as we do, Andrew, but very, very glad that you've got those. Georgia, sorry. My grandfather was an ARP warden. He also had to check on people's blackout curtains and put fires out if required. Didn't ask him for any details or record it. He passed away when I was 13. Yeah, like we were just saying, right? That never-ending saga of being too young to understand how important those questions are. Her mom, Joan, did tell me she hated going down the air raid shelter. It was cold, damp, dark, and full of spiders. So that's the story you need to make sure that you write down, Georgia, right? Write down what you remember about what your grandfather was telling you, but also write your mom's stories and get that perception of being a 13-year-old, or, sorry, you were 13, being a child and thinking about it as a cold, damp, dark, spider-ridden location. All of that matters, I think. The ARP wardens, I think, are really interesting. I was actually, like I said, I've been researching a story in Bristol and working on ARP stuff in the last couple of weeks. It's all really fascinating. Sarah inherited an original photo of a bomb crater the width of the road directly outside my dad's family home in Aberdeen. Wow, narrow escape indeed. And what a cool piece of ephemera and photograph to have in your family collection. And my husband's grandfather was part of the Home Guard, and his job was to make sure that everyone's blackout curtains were working properly. So a couple of those now. Anne and Georgia have that in common. Grandpa working on curtains, a very important task, right? Essential, really, to trying to disguise locations. Jean commented, my father told me that they had anti-aircraft guns at the rear of their house, which was very loud, but didn't talk about it other than that. Mother lived in a farm that had been in the family over 200 years. They moved out because it was situated on the perimeter of the Burtonwood base, the American Air Base in Lancashire. Yeah, I've heard of that one. So did they ever go back to the land, Jean, or they just left and that was it? Interesting. Yeah, really interesting. And yeah, I can kind of understand, like, you kind of hint at the idea that, your dad didn't want to talk about it much. And that is very true, right? It's a just hugely traumatic event. Anne, my mother-in-law, was a young girl during World War II. She was scheduled to be sent to Canada with the children's program, but the ship was sunk. Oh no, the week before they shipped out. So she ended up staying in England. That's kind of a crazy story. I don't know if I've ever heard anything like that before, where you have it kind of all lined up in terms of the timeline like that. That's pretty incredible, Anne. That's a good one. Nicole says the Blitz was never really part of my history. Both sides of my paternal and maternal side fought in World War I and World War II. Great paternal uncle had been captured during the war and was tortured because of his name, which was Hessel. Apparently, it sounded German at the time. He was in Italy when that happened. My great grandfather joined the World War I with his adopted brother, which I found nice to know. Yeah, there's a lot there. I would say the Blitz is part of your family history, right? Because while your direct ancestors maybe were actually in Europe, you know, who were they thinking about back home that they were concerned about? I don't know. I think everything's part of, like, that's my problem, right? I said it earlier. I'm interested in everything, and I think everything is associated to everybody, right? So I didn't have my family's been in the U.S. for a really long time, 400 years, and I don't have anybody in the British Army after the very 1820s, but I still think of the Blitz as part of my family story because my ancestors fought in World War II, and they were impacted to the extent that a couple of them were stationed in England during the war, and would have had a connection there. So I don't know. That's my biggest issue with research, actually, is because everything's connected, right? And I can't stop myself from pulling all these little bits of history, even though it has no real direct connection to my family. But it does, everything does. All right. And lastly, Sarah, my partner's granddad. Oh, we read this one already. Sorry, Sarah. Eyewitness to the Coventry Blitz and seeing the blaze. And those were the ones that we highlighted. We wanted to make sure we share. I know there's more. Liam saying, I shudder every time someone mentions spiders in the shelters. I got to be honest. Yeah, I'm not totally comfortable with the spiders either. Yeah. Kim still has her granddad's ARP helmet and gas mask, along with some badges and an armband. That's important. Those are important pieces of memorabilia. Rosie, the wife of her great uncle, was one of the ones that were killed. One of 19 killed September 1940 when a bomb was dropped in Chelsea. Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? It's hard. They're hard things to talk about. And it feels so recent. And then this one, because it is traumatic, right? Family members point blank refuse to talk about anything to do with the war. Mm-hmm. There's a couple moments in history that my family has that experience too. Yeah, it's just too much sometimes. Gordon, his father was a post office delivery boy in 39, was sent to Harrogate when he met my mom and joined up in 42. So many comments, so many things to say. Karen giving us another thought. My granny's cousins all live in the US from the 1880s. So my cousin recently told me there was a plan to send Granny and her children to the US if things got worse. Oh, so there's like a plan B in case things got really bad. I don't know how much worse they needed to get, but yeah. So it was like a backup plan to send over to the relatives in the States. Janet telling us a little follow-up. Thanks, Janet. Her mom's notes are written up and submitted them to a magazine. They're also on the BBC People's War Archive. That's fantastic. And I've just sent an article to the local Family History Society about 8 women victims of the V1 attack. And I know, Janet, you're prolific when it comes to doing this and writing. Karen is as well. I feel like this kind of sharing, I think, is really crucial for all of us, right? And make sure that you add to public online archives like the BBC People's War Archive. Write these stories up, share them with your Family History Society, get them published, send them to the magazines. Make sure that you're sharing that memory and that story, right? It keeps it all alive and real. There are so many more comments coming in, and we only have 5 minutes left. I'm not going to get to all of these. All right, I'm going to scroll back for just a second. because we did have some other comments. Daphne wants more Dundee newspapers. Noted, Daphne. We will share that with Rose and the team and see if we can get that on the list and see if we can get some Dundee stuff out. So thank you for that feedback. Also, just bear in mind, right, that kind of feedback's always welcome. We love that stuff. Let's do, I think we've got time for one more and then we'll close it up. So Pickles, we're going to close out with you. My great grandmother was living in Wimbledon in South London. When her street was bombed, she was rescued from her slightly damaged house and put in hospital bed to sleep. She died soon after, said only slept upright in her chair for several years due to breathing issues. Oh my gosh. So it's the fact that she was rescued and put on a flat bed that, wow. And of course they wouldn't have known that. And so they were just trying to take care of her. Oh gosh. Pickles, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Yikes. Okay. Jan wants to know what the BBC reference was that I just listed. So let me put that back up on the screen if I can find it again. It is the BBC People's War Archive. It's from Janet Sutton's comment if you need it, Jan. So just use your favorite search engine and take a look at that. The BBC People's War Archive is what you're looking for. All right. I think that is what we have time for today. Thank you all. Thank you all very much for joining us. And again, our thanks to Damien Kimberley at the Coventry Archives one more time for coming on and talking us through these records and this incredible new partnership that we're all really excited about. If you get the chance, send him an email. If you have questions or queries about your research in the Coventry area, you want to make sure that you're good friends with the archive, but also the local Family History Society, right? Use those resources as much as you can to get all of those little secrets from the records collection, so much more than what we could ever digitize and put online, because there's just so much. And a quick update on that BBC I didn't actually know this. I didn't know it was archived and you can't submit articles any longer, but still a good resource. I believe it's still active, and if not, you can probably find it on what's that website Internet Archive does that you can look back at old websites. But here is the link David gave us. Thank you so much, David. Thank you all very much. We'll leave it at that. We'll see you next week with more new records and more new newspapers. Until then, have a fantastic time researching your family history. Let us know what your discoveries are and what you find. Send in your comments and queries and questions. We're always happy to ask those. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. And thank you very much again for always being with us. We appreciate you very much.